everybody, and welcome back to Writing the Rapids, the show where I, Joe Bielecki, talk to writers about writing. Very often those writers have been recommended to me by writers who have previously been on the show. In this case, we're having the return of Mike Corrao, as well as two new people, Danika Stegeman LeMay and William Watson, to talk about Mike's new press called Cloak, as well as Danika's and William's pieces published through that press. Danika Stegeman LeMay's work has appeared in 32 poems: Afternoon Visitor, Blue Arrangements, Cloak, Concision, Forklift, O, Leavings, and Word for Word, among other places, and is forthcoming in Apartment. Her video poem, Then Beetlejuice Reappears, was an official selection in the 2021 Midwest Video Poetry Festival. Danika's debut collection of poems, Pilot, is available from Spork Press. Her website is danikastegmanlemay.com. William Watson has self-published two titles, Hell and Paradise, as well as the text Police Lucifer for Cloak. His work can be found at snatchwilden.wordpress.com. Those links will be in the show notes. If you want to help out this show, you can do so on patreon.com/noisemakerjoe. You can do it on paypal.me/noisemakerjoe with either a recurring or a one-time, respectively, or you can buy my book called Tired. Now, without further ado, let's get into my talk with Mike, Danika, and William. I think a good place to begin is probably with Mike, so that we can uncover the seed of Cloak. And where'd you get the idea? I know that you've been, anybody who's familiar with the show should know that you've been working with this sort of object-oriented writing for a while, so it's not surprising that you would come up with something like Cloak. But when did the idea start, and how have you developed it thus far?
It was funny because I think maybe 2 years ago, I mean, for the last probably 2.5 years, I've been working pretty consistently with 1111 Press. As a designer and as an editor. And I think it was about like a year or two ago, probably 2 years ago now, that Andrew was like, oh yeah, you'll probably start your own thing eventually. And I was like, oh, that I would never. That sounds horrible. Like, that sounds like the worst experience, because I feel like everybody who I know who runs presses is like always stressed and incredibly busy. But then I, being the idiot that I am, about a year ago was like, oh yeah, I think I'm going to start my own thing. And so it felt natural to do kind of that, maybe design oriented is a good way to put it, kind of focus with the press. I like what John does with Inside the Castle, where it's kind of like the press isn't just kind of working in this curatorial and maybe like business oriented capacity of kind of like choosing books and then facilitating kind of their publication distribution. I like the idea of it being like the publisher as the designer. It makes it feel more kind of directly collaborative to me, although obviously there's that collaborative element for all presses. And so that way I get to kind of directly work on each book in a very kind of hands-on capacity. Which goes for, with Cloak, it's kind of equally digital and print. And so with the digital projects, I'm able to kind of facilitate and design kind of whatever weird form that might take, which so far for Loganberry was a Bitsy game. So this like 1-bit kind of walking sim where Loganberry provided the text, and then for Danika through a Twine project, which was her kind of base poem of Relentless, worked in with this kind of Mad Lib element, making it this seemingly infinitely kind of producing poem. And so I think the main focus of kind of publisher as designer has been the driving force for Cloak, and then just these ideas of concealment and visibility came up kind of naturally as things I was interested in, wanted to focus on.
Yeah, by being friends with you on Goodreads, I noticed that over the past couple of years you've been reading a lot of stuff on like architecture and things like that, and lots of that sort of like not straight political theory stuff from Verso, but still political.
I like that as a, like, you can back ray trace using Goodreads, and it's funny because on my desk right now is investigative aesthetics, Hero Sturreal, who's like did In Defense of the Poor Image, and then Paul Virilio. So it's like it's exactly what you've caught me on Goodreads going through.
Right. Yeah, I had that same chat with somebody else on the show where I was like, yeah, I'm not surprised you wrote this book because for the past year you've been reading books about serial killers. So like, oh yeah, I trace the lineage there. So everybody needs to just get on Goodreads more, I think.
I feel like that's the surveillance bit. It's like I can't hide what I've been doing, even though I'm the one that's like documenting it.
Right.
I'm like, how dare you trace this thing that I've been publicly tracking?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with Relentless. I think Relentless is a fun project. So where did that start, Danika?
Thank you. So that started off as a poem that was about a page and a half long, from a project I'm working on right now called Ablation. That the poem itself, like the finite or analog version of the poem that's not online, is now about 8 pages long. When I brought the idea to Mike, I ended up writing a lot more lines. Mike and I met last October at an 11/11 press event at the Twin Cities Book Festival. And we get together maybe once a month we live in the same city in Minneapolis, just to talk about books and ideas. And he had told me about Cloak. And so I started thinking about a project that we might be able to work on together. And so I was just thinking about what might be a good fit, and also something that would use some of Mike's strengths, like he's talking about with design. And also, I knew that he had an understanding of like coding more so than I do. And so I had this poem that was about a page and a half long that each line ended with relentless. And it wasn't quite doing what I wanted it to. And I just started thinking about how I could make the form of the poem more like what the content was. Like I wanted it to be this relentless object that didn't stop, that insisted on persisting and surviving and was like infinite. And so I had this idea that maybe it could be code assisted, where it would sort of endlessly iterate if I wrote more lines, and then sentences could have words plugged into them. And I described this to Mike at a dinner that we had, and he said, oh yeah, absolutely, I can do that, and told me about a project. And Mike, I'm not going to remember what the project is called, that he had worked on that was similar. And so we kind of went from there, and I wrote way more lines, and also wrote the sort of Mad Libs lines that Mike has referred to, where basically I made sentences that had missing parts of language in them. Like it would be a full sentence, but without a verb. And then I wrote about over 80 pages worth of words in a word bank to be plugged into those Mad Lib statements, and sent that all to Mike, and he plugged it in and did all of the design.
Very nice. Yeah, that's that. I forget the name of it too. You showed it to me one time when we were talking, Mike. The thing you did through 11/11 that's like kind of buried in their Amazon or something.
Oh yeah, it's Generative Strato is the name.
That's the name.
There's a couple like Twine projects. That one was a lot uglier on the back end than this is. I've learned some lessons since then. But it's kind of similar to the code that for Mancer that's coming out soon, although that one's even sloppier than that. But it's effectively like 2 pages in Twine, like one with kind of all the like pre-made lines that Danika had done, and then one just kind of for the fill in the blank. But it's really funny to look at because it's essentially just Mad Libs, and then you go down and it's just this massive set of word banks. I remember for Danika had sent me like an initial kind of set, and then was like, "Oh, I came up with some more words," and it was like a 40-page list of like different like nouns and adjectives. So the back end has like, it's not very glamorous because it's just copy and pasting all of these words just into a big old word bank. But the fun part of that one was the fonts and the colors are randomized. But the way it works, kind of playing off that idea of surveillance, is that it checks your computer for all the fonts that it could use that are in the kind of list of options.
Oh.
And so there's, I think, like 30 or 40 fonts that you could potentially have it feed through. But for example, if you don't have like Microsoft Word, then all of those options won't be there. And so there's a way that very simplistically I was able to have it like look at kind of what on that list you had. So it kind of pulls from what's available. And so there's some that like only show up on my computer, I'm sure. But it was a very fun little kind of like Easter egg. So like if you play it on your phone, I think it'll probably just be in like Arial. Because obviously people don't have like the Microsoft suite on their phone. But just as this like little Easter egg that like Joker Man and all these ugly fonts will start showing up if you have the right programs.
Yeah, I've only played it on my phone, and I had seen the screenshots with all these different fonts, and I was like, why am I not getting all these fun fonts? But yeah, because I'm on a Mac, and I think it's only Windows compatible, correct?
Yeah, well, I think so the base game is like browser, so you should be able to play it in anything, but a lot of those fonts might not show up on a Mac.
Right. But yeah, playing it on my phone, I was like, I want the fonts. I want all these crazy fonts. Yeah.
Because I think the way you have to do it, if you want the font, you have to like put them in a kind of like directory and have it pull from that, which for Twine is kind of like funky, because Twine's, it's like code but not code. It's this weird in between.
Yeah.
And so I haven't fully figured out how to do like actual stuff like JavaScript wise in there or anything like that. It's like HTML, CSS adjacent in a way I don't fully understand.
That's fascinating. I wonder if my wife could help me with that. She does web design stuff. Huh.
Oh yeah, she's way more Danika said that I had some code literacy, but it's a shoddy amount. It's kind of like I say that I can do the thing before I know I can.
Yeah.
And then figure it out from there.
All of the world's,
we made it work.
Yeah, all of the world's knowledge is available on the internet if you can find it.
Oh yeah, Codecademy has done me so many favors.
So let's move on. Just while we're sort of in this introductory phase of the episode, let's talk about Police Lucifer. I like the tweet that Cloak put out about it. Rogue transmissions ricocheting through the soft gray matter of your brain, and the screenshots of the book look just wild.
Oh, it's a fun one. I'll let William describe it, but it's a fun one, yeah.
Well, first off, thank you. Yeah, it's kind of wild. Like as far as like my introduction to Cloak, I've in a weird way, I'm still kind of like new to the whole like this kind of world of I hate, it's not experimental literature, whatever anybody wants to call it, whatever. I've only really sort of been dabbling in the world for like, I don't know, a couple of years. But I had been aware of Mike's work, and I just kept seeing his work popping up, and I was like, this is, design-wise, this is all really awesome stuff. And so when I saw that Cloak was starting, I had this piece that I had been working on, and so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna send it and see what happens. And I really didn't expect to hear anything. And I was very excited when Mike was interested in working on it. And then through that, I also was like, cool, this is kind of like I get to work with Mike, whose work I really appreciated. And with, like he said, with the concept of like surveillance, which can mean 1,000 million things. To me, the text itself already had this kind of quality of surveillance because it's very obviously, I feel like that we're in a place right now where we feel a lot of our lives have sort of become online, because of, the pandemic and everything. And I feel like we're always kind of under some form of surveillance, which that doesn't have anything to do with the text, but it does kind of inform that. I think I was writing from a perspective of surveillance. And the text itself, it kind of all started with me thinking about Edmund Kemper, the serial killer. And I had a big fascination with serial killers in my my younger years. When I was in my 20s, I mean, I've probably seen every interview that's on YouTube. And Kemper was somebody that I really felt like I had a fascination for. And in no way am I saying he's like some, cool figure to like, look at. But there's something about his figure, his form, that has almost this kind of otherworldliness to it. And I think that just that specific thought is what really kind of set the tone for the book. I think the first line that I wrote, which it may have just been like a leftover line for something else I was working on, was something about Kemper's throat or Kemper's esophagus becomes a hallway or becomes a doorway. I can't remember. And it was sort of this weird thing about form and reality sort of bending. And because of surveillance, we're always looking at these as people, as these kind of vessels of information. And that's kind of how this whole thing started. Was Edmund Kemper sort of became this weird form to me of psychology and sociology and just this total eeriness. So yeah, that's kind of how it started.
He is an interesting figure. I've really only ever engaged with him through the Mindhunter TV show.
Right.
But I do remember seeing an article after the first season of that show was really taking off that, like, if you've heard an audiobook, it's a very good chance that he's read it, because he's got such pipes on him and
absolutely
nothing but time on his hands.
I remember hearing that as well, and I thought that was so crazy, and it made me want to seek out those. I want to say maybe I read that it was like all of the like LibriVox or whatever, like he was on that. There was a ton of those, maybe. I'm not really sure, but very interesting, weird character. And the Mindhunter thing, everybody really praised that, and I saw a little bit of it, and I thought the guy did a really good job. But seeing those initial videos of him and everything kind of being put through this YouTube filter of everything was sort of this blue, washed out look, but you had this very intelligent man with his, his like, prison issue glasses, which I think were the glasses he wore anyway. But it was just, it had such this otherworldly eeriness to it beyond just the things he was saying.
Right. Yeah. I think there's something to the fact that a very smart sounding person who also likes to kill somebody is just very discordant in our mind.
Yes. I think that in and of itself was a huge like influence on the work itself. Was it's, that's the thing about like, and I don't want to get into some big conversation about serial killers, but it is an interesting thing when when you put so much focus on this particular sort of sect of society. But, Kemper was like, he was very intelligent, and that to me, it's what really drove this, this quality to it that was, it's so weird. I don't know. He was such a strange character, and I could imagine an entire sort of society and ecosystem that was built on this sort of slanted personality, slanted perspective of this weird creature, Yeah,
absolutely. And then the other Cloak piece, well, there's two, the self-titled release, and then the demonology zine. So far, Mike, how do you see all of this like fitting together? All of these releases so far.
I think that, through that kind of, as William said, like, although concealment, visibility, surveillance are all very like broad concepts, but I think that they all kind of latch onto that. And I think that combination of like some connection to that concept and the like highly kind of design oriented look of a lot of the work. Because I don't know if you've seen the physical copies of those two or of Williams, but they're all very kind of, every page is unique to some extent with them.
Mm-hmm.
There's very much like that close attention to detail and adding this like kind of visuality to the elements. Like with the self-titled release, it's kind of a weird kind of theory text mapping out kind of the goal of the press. Looking at the Cloak as, I like the Cloak as related to those topics because it's something that you can kind of see action occurring behind it, but you can't kind of see the specificity of what that action is. So it's concealment in this almost taunting manner. Like you see the hand rustling, but you don't see what it's really doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of what that first title explores. And that one's in color, and so a lot of the inside is these kind of like very bright CMYK designs. And then with Exchange of Demonology, Senya's book, it's exploring that kind of, it's almost a kind of like radical visibility. Excuse me. And so those zines are dealing with kind of these different modes of engaging with demonology. With the first one that she sent me is the second issue of the 3, which is about demonology as a tool towards unionization.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked the idea of this kind of occultism informing leftist action. But so all of those are, with that one in particular, it's very fun because there's kind of this black gradient that comes from the inner margin.
Yeah.
And so in the digital versions, it almost kind of looks like it's been Xeroxed in. But then in the print version, it's like this weird kind of like void pulling you towards the gutter. And so I really liked the kind of double purpose that served. But I would say it's that combination of kind of a shared, although very broad theme with that highly visual element is kind of what I see holding them together. But I want to make sure that there's a very kind of deliberate variety of kind of topics and modes. Like in July or August, the next print project is a tabletop role-playing game booklet. It's originally based on like a text-based game that I had made a long time ago called Bodies Like Meat, expanded into this like full kind of fleshed out world and rule set, kind of dealing with a more spatialized idea of concealment, maybe more kind of grounded and direct. But so I like the idea of all of these kind of different, very visual but unique works kind of coming together.
Yeah, there's a sort of neo-Renaissance sort of thing that I'm seeing happening in various places around this sort of world where I don't think anybody's like trying to develop a unified theory of art and media or anything, but this the Renaissance had this sort of lack of categorization where people were doing alchemy and science and religion and philosophy all at the same time, just as aspects of one thing. And I'm seeing that every now and again. And I think Cloak is a good example of it, of this, like, let's pull esoteric studies and poetry and design together and philosophy and like see what we can use all of those to make.
Totally. And that's, I talked to John about this a bit from Inside the Castle because I helped there as well with designing titles and doing a bit of editing. And it's just kind of, it's hard to describe what pulls the works together, but it's in a way that they all feel like Cloak titles, at least to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's not a lot of kind of direct similarities between Relentless and Police for Lucifer, but they both feel at home under that like Cloak banner in my eyes. Which is, it's early for Cloak. It's been, I think the first title, that self-titled one, came out in, I want to say February. So it hasn't been a long time, but there's still kind of a cohesion that I feel between the works. But they're definitely kind of all in some way unclassifiable.
Yeah, I think so too. So what about so Danika and William, like how do you see your pieces kind of interacting in the Cloak ecosystem with the other pieces that have been put out?
For mine, like Mike said, it's really early on in the time of this whole thing, but I see mine kind of fitting in, and it's sort of in the same way that you just said. We're touching on these ideas that you're not gonna these kind of themes, these themes that mix philosophy and sociology and politics and religion and everything. Like lots of different places cover these things, but it's within this sort of ecosystem that Mike's created with this that we can kind of do that in a free way, and yet obviously I think Mike's connection kind of has this, it provides this sort of like this mesh that coats everything, and because of his design, but also we're all kind of touching on similar themes in our own ways, and that's how I see Police Lucifer fitting into it. It's in certain ways there may be themes in my work that's touching the same things as in Danika's work, or even with Logan's game. There's some of the same concepts going on. They're just being put through completely different filters, but that theme runs through it, and so there's a thread that's kind of forms this web in my mind. And that's when I got involved with Cloak, it was sort of the only release out at the time was the self-titled one. And then I think Logan's came out, and when I saw Logan's, I was like, this is perfect. And as I've seen the other pieces come out, the picture has even come together even more cementing what Mike told me in the the initial conversation that we had about it. And I absolutely see Police Lucifer in that mix, and I don't think that it's just like any random experimental piece can be thrown into this and it works. Absolutely not. There's a cohesion that comes through these themes, along with the visual aspect and the nature of the writing in some way. That's how I see Police Lucifer fitting into it.
Yeah, I totally agree with what William's saying about the design, and then also like each piece, even though we're all very different creators, there is we're each like bringing our own vision to this idea of surveillance and something being cloaked. And I really love, Joe, what you were saying about alchemy, because I feel like all of these pieces are performing a kind of alchemy that's very tied to the deteriorating state of like the world that we live in. And while the materials that we're using and approaching that sort of alchemy through, we're all taking this like some aspect of like living at the end, near the end of times. And so instead of taking like lead and making it to gold, we're taking rectum, like something that's wrecked, and transforming it through different mediums, like be it through demons or through the lens of like just trying to, like, Relentless is just like trying to find ways that we still like survive in this, like, while acknowledging like the waste. And so I feel like all of the pieces are doing something like that, and like revealing things while also like in a way, like, wow, things like a mask is for hiding, but it also like reveals the true nature of things underneath. Like, it allows a performance, and a cloak does that too. And so I feel like all of these pieces are doing that. And then it really is all, even though all of the objects, physical and digital, look different, they're all so thoughtfully approached by Mike. And there is like, so like Police Lucifer has completely different looking pages than the Senya's demonology zines. And it's because those are the pages that like need to be in this book. And so like Mike's approach to design is like is tying things together too. And it's hard to like describe without showing you the books, but it's like very each piece has exactly the form that it needs, and that comes from like Mike's approach to it.
Thank you. It feels kind of funny because anytime anybody like asks me about Cloak, I want to do like a show and tell. Like I feel like a little kid in elementary school where I want to like run and grab the little pile of books and be like, oh well, it's like this, and show them, because it feels like something that's hard to verbalize at the moment. I am realizing, though, kind of thinking about Relentless and Police Lucifer, the other projects, and I think it's more maybe something related to my subconscious, but there's a kind of through line of a lot of the projects are dealing with cruelty in some capacity, which is maybe a byproduct or instigator for surveillance. But thinking of certain lines from Relentless about like starving demons, or about the kind of imagery that shows up in Police Lucifer, there seems to be maybe a through line of like cruelty or brutality that I've gotten fixated on without realizing until now.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, I think I like the idea too that like the mask or the cloak can be part of a performance, right? Like you think about a magician, and it's very much a function. The concealment is a function of the reveal. But cruelty is an interesting thing too. As you were saying that, I just like clicked through a couple of the lines from Relentless because I just have it open, and there's something
There's
about
also
that.
Cruelty in the font choice.
Yeah, sometimes, man, sometimes, and the color choices as well sometimes too.
Yep.
And it's like sticking in my brain. One of the things that I bring up a lot to people is my, I don't know, just painful noticing of the fact that so many of what somebody might call experimental writing or avant-garde is generally very dark in content. And while I don't see anything wrong with that, I tend to wonder why that tends to be. And Mike, you sort of mentioned at the beginning, there's, at least some humor to, the idea of starting a press and whatnot.
Yeah.
And
I like I kind of, in that darkness, I think that there's a certain amount of playfulness, at least with a lot of this work. Thinking of, there's lines from Relentless that are just deeply fun to me that'll come up, either because Danika wrote a funny line or because the Mad Lib program will like put together a line that I'm like, what the fuck is that? Either as like gibberish or just some like comedic mixture of words. Or the other day, a friend sent me a screenshot after they had bought a copy of Police Lucifer. There's this kind of like triptych panel of images, and the middle one is just these wide, like Xeroxed eyes, and they sent me just a zoom in of that pair of eyes. So there's this way that I feel like you can find comedy in a lot of these projects. In like the self-titled release on the first page, there's like these 3D stacked sentences that like say I have not abandoned my 2D roots, in like this like insecure proclamation. Or there's like discussions of VR chat and retail work in Senya's book. And so I think there's this way that a lot of experimental writing is dark, but I love seeing it where it has that kind of darkness, but then there's these moments where you can just kind of like laugh or have fun. Not a lack of like seriousness, but almost like the presence of this like alternative reading or this kind of parallel reading of just like the absurdity of something being dark, you know?
Yeah, there's, I think sometimes there's those moments like if you're in a haunted house and somebody pops out at you and instead of screaming, you just kind of laugh. Just like a big old ha as somebody's popping out at you in the dark. Where I don't know, the tension just kind of like clicks into something else, right? Where like, I don't know,
Totally.
if you get into a bath that's way too cold, it feels like it's hot for a second, or vice versa.
I think there's... Go ahead. I'm so sorry.
Okay. I was just going to say those things are not that far apart, right? Like the darkness and the play or like joy or like, we think of those as like binary things, but they're like really in a circle, like they're a continuum. Or like hyenas laugh because they're uncomfortable. Like these things are tied,
Mm-hmm.
But go ahead, William, what were you going to say?
I completely agree with everything you just said. And I think that there's, we talk about how there is sort of this harshness kind of that comes with the territory. But I think that most everything in this kind of realm does have this comedy to it. And it may be dark, or it may be misunderstood or not understood at all. But I think that this is going to sound very cheesy, but I think that we kind of live in this world where we're constantly bashed in the face with new traumatic experiences, whether they're our own, they're societal. We have this constantly. And so it's one of those things where it's kind of like, one, I can choose to either completely have an emotional breakdown about everything I'm seeing right now, which has happened to myself and probably everyone, or I can almost laugh at the absurdity of where humanity is right now, where we've gone with things. And I think that, with my work with Police Lucifer, it is absolutely a mirror up against that absurdity. And while writing it and while writing a lot of the material that I work on, I find humor in it. And I think that it's absurd that I find humor in it. And I also think that anyone who reads this and sort of finds that is embracing that absurdity as well. And I think that kind of comes right in line with, sort of that attack that we're under, and the trauma that we're all like dealing with. I think the comedy is a part of that.
Totally. And I excuse me. And that's like, I think very much something I've been looking for in the Cloak titles, is that kind of that potential for the absurdity to be revealed. In a lot of recent work, at least like of my own work within and outside of Cloak, I've loved the idea of kind of almost like the creeping in of like mimetic content of this kind of like almost outright stupidity in line with like these very serious and thoughtful projects. I'd been working on a piece recently that Danika had very kindly read for me called Stealth Anxiety Mega Mix, where there's like these very kind of like either gruesome or surreal or like horrific images, and then there'll be like lines that are like about the father-son uppercut or like the erotic relationship between the hand and the cadaver, and just these like almost completely idiotic scenes like emerging in a work that's like otherwise serious, and pulling that kind of surreal or absurd kind of approach that a lot of memes take. And I've seen in some of the architecture work I've read, as you saw in Goodreads, this idea of like the meme as a critical mode that I find really compelling, as this way to navigate like decorum and like an academic kind of etiquette in order to approach the thing as it is.
Yeah.
Stealth Anxiety Megamix is an awesome book. And very,
I can't.
very
I got to read
enjoyable.
it. I've got to
Yeah.
read it. I'm so excited about that. And
loved it.
I thought that I think Logan's game Rectum was probably, I mean, the title alone is
Right.
pretty hilarious. I think that when I saw that, and even with the self-titled Cloak release, the first release, I saw this play of even with the design, with the color work, it's not dark. I would say that you look at that and it's not dark. Some could say it's beautiful, and I think the same can be said with Rectum. It's got these bright colors, definitely with Danika's work, and it sort of I feel embraces that absurdity again, because you're seeing these images that are off. For one, it's a little off. Maybe it's that uncanny valley sort of situation, but it makes you, it gives you this uneasiness because the lyrical themes may not match the images you're seeing or the way that the text is. I made Police Lucifer. I wanted it to look almost like a punk zine or something.
Mm-hmm.
When the topics within are not at all like that. It's very clinical, and it's very, like, there's almost elements of science fiction, and it's completely. It's taking humanity and removing that. It's removing like the rawness, but I wanted it to look raw. So I guess there it's sort of, again, embracing that absurdity and that weird, like the image we put up, the facade we live with, or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I like looking at the pictures of Police Lucifer and having everything like in those boxes, kind of like segmented out from each other.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason the idea of or the kind of framing of the rogue transmission immediately came to mind, is these, because within those boxes it'll be this relentless, we could say, series of images one after another, with each sentence almost like montage, running through all of these different scenes and ideas. But I love that it's held together by that container very literally. And so it feels like each different transmission coming in. With the images as well, a lot of those are kind of boxed. But it feels like you're tuning the ham radio, and you hear this garbled voice saying something, and you're like, what is that? What does that mean? And you have to keep trying to kind of tune the knob until you can finally hear it full.
And that the kind of garbage mess behind that is there. And when I sent Mike the pieces, I was like, there's all this garbage, destroyed, filtered text that means nothing. But then again, it does mean things, but it's more about a message. And when Mike when he presented the idea of the radio transmission, I was like, this is it. This is spot on, exactly what I was going for. Because in the boxes, it's not necessarily that, oh, this box is this person talking and this box is this person talking. There's the idea of the character within the book is very vague at best. I mean, aside from Kemper and yourself, the reader, whoever that may be. But it's like Mike says, it's these weird sort of kind of clarified things that break through the just shit mess. It comes through, and you get a little bit of this, and that's what the imagery is too. It's these kind of frequencies that you're getting lost in for a minute, and before you find your footing again. And that when Mike told me the radio transmission thing, I was like, that's absolutely spot on what I'm going for here.
Do any of you guys ever go on to any of the websites that pull shortwave radio transmissions and just filter around for a while?
A little bit, yeah. I've done it a couple of times just out of sheer curiosity, as if I was going to find something.
Right.
It feels like going on the beach with a metal detector almost, where it's I'm not gonna really there's gonna be no treasure that I come across, but there's the idea that there might be, there's that just looking for it is compelling.
Right. Yeah, I like to do that every now and again too, and the site I use has an IRC room, and it's there's 4 messages in it a day, and there's the one person who's like very serious about shortwave radio just as a medium, and then it's a whole bunch of people that are like, I heard some beeps, is that the Russians? As if we were like in the 80s still.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm gonna use that. I like to listen to like white noise sometimes when I write. I'm gonna totally go find some shortwave transmissions and just listen to that.
I highly recommend it. If for
white
no
noise is interesting as like an option for while you're working, because I feel like I end up doing like really abrasive stuff or like a little bit more than white noise, like Robert Ashley's like Private Lives.
Yeah, I like to do space sounds, and sometimes I listen to Keith Jarrett or Glenn Gould or something.
To that point, William also has a playlist on his WordPress site that's on Spotify that people could find, a Police Lucifer soundtrack, and I've noticed that people are doing that too. I like the idea. One of the things, I think you mentioned it, Mike, when we like first ever talked, that you like the type of music you listen to, and I like this idea of like letting in lots of sensory stuff while you're writing. I like the idea. I mean, the radio transmission thing makes me think of it too, that like it just accidentally writing things down.
I immediately attempt to overwhelm myself like anytime I work. It's like I'll play like YouTube videos or movies or something in the background where there's like direct speech that will like get in the way of me thinking clearly. But then when I edit, I'll kind of play something softer or nothing at all and like have a more clear head. But in the moment, I like the idea that I just something can go through me, and then when I come back to visit, I'm like, I don't really feel like I wrote that. Like going back to any of the like books that I've had come out, it feels more like I'm just someone who knows the book well rather than like the person who actually wrote it.
Yeah, I like the idea of the book just kind of coming out of you, right? I guess that's pretty in line with the whole like book as its own object, right? The inside the castle line of like, it's just an impossible thing in our world.
Yeah. I do like part of that with I think I don't know if it's in that kind of blurb or if it's something he said somewhere else, but I do like John's bit of like the book is not an object with a kind of like lifted kind of importance. Like if you buy a book, it's equally as valuable if you read it or it just sits on your table, or if you use it as like a paperweight or a door stopper. Like I like the book as an object that does not need to necessarily be read, but is just its value isn't existing at all.
Yeah, I think there's a large contingent of people on like Instagram who very much treat books that way.
That's so if you just buy a Cloak title and flip through it and look at the pretty colors or pictures and then close it, or if you just spam click the Relentless on Danika's project, I feel like that is equal value to me. Like any kind of mode of engagement I'm interested in, because I feel like if you're going to talk about the kind of book object as this like alternative mode, then you have to be willing to see kind of alternative approaches as well. I don't think you can just say like it's a different form of book, but you can treat it the same.
Right.
Seems like it's a kind of half-baked approach. Like I know William had 2 books that he had put out. He had sent me Hell and then later on Paradise, but part of the fun of those books for me is because similar to Police Lucifer, it's this kind of onslaught of like rapidly shifting images. Part of the fun of that is like skimming and then seeing what you latch on to. And so I think finding those kind of different modes of approaching the book, even if it's only kind of a slightly different mode like that, is a very fun approach with these less conventional works.
I think that you absolutely cannot approach a lot of this material with the mindset of, I'm going to read this, I don't know, John Grisham book. This we're talking about themes that are found in a lot of regular literature, but we're sort of, at least in the way I do what I do, is I'm blasting it with chaos, because I see chaos everywhere. And again, that goes back to the absurdity of everything. I think that, and Mike's not the only person that said that about my work, is that it's like sort of this sort of torrential, onslaught of imagery, and I want that to be the case. And in a way, when I write these things, I'm like, anybody who sits and reads this all the way through in one go is a maniac. And I would never expect anyone to ever do that. And that's the same way. It's like, well, it's like any other terrible thing that we see, with the exception to maybe horror movies, which, you have to kind of go in and rock through it. But, I want there to be sort of almost an endurance to it. You kind of do what you can, and then you find your way back to it eventually. I think that is sort of a necessary thing with my work. And I wrote a 500-page book. I quote unquote wrote a 500-page book because that to me was comedy. I was like, why would I do this? Well, for one, it was really fun, but also just because it's utterly ridiculous. I've self-published one book, and I'm going to do a 500-page book. That's dumb. But to me, that's hilarious, and I like that. And I see that a lot. I saw that when I read Logan's book, the Crystal Lake book. That was, to me, there was like a comedy to that, but it was also extremely dark and extremely disturbing, but it was beautiful in that way.
And that's, working with Logan, there's a certain kind of great comedy to it in the way that he gives design direction. Like for Rectum, which saying out loud to anybody is like a joke in and of itself.
Yeah.
Being that it's WRECKDOM. But you tell someone like, oh, I was working on this project called Rectum, and they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? But Logan is really funny for design direction, because he'll send like a 2,000 word email for something, and then also just be like, I want the vibe to be gothic hyperpop, is like what he said for Rectum. And so that's why it's like these bright, like pink green, like colors. But with Crystal Lake, it was funny because the edits would be like, can you add a hand that looks like it has cum on it? Or like, just like random kind of bits like in there. And there's this hand I found that like had shampoo pouring down it. And it kind of edited it to look like that. But there's like and for that one, he sent me like an entire like Google photo album. But there's this really fun element to doing design for these projects. And like over the years, it started to feel more like I'm a designer who writes rather than a writer who designs. Just in that kind of importance is starting cropping up as like a higher and higher priority in my work for me. But getting to work on other people's books is such a fun kind of thing in and of itself, beyond kind of like specifically Cloak, in that you just get these wild kind of directions or instructions. But Logan is really funny in that capacity. I'm working on his next book for Inside the Castle, Casket Flare, as well.
Ooh.
And some of the kind of like design direction for that is just incredibly funny. And even just small places will be like, can you scribble my eyes out more in the author photo? Like just all of these little kind of details. Or he'll send me like, for Crystal Lake, he sent me this like BDSM mag that he had taken like scans of those from, I want to say like the 70s, and said like, I like the vibe of this. And that's like, he'll like overwhelm with options, and he'll be like, use any or none of this. And so there's this kind of comedy that sometimes it's one sentence and sometimes it's like a massive heap.
Huh. I've only interacted with him a couple of times, but it's funny because that's just not been the interaction. But I guess it's because I haven't interacted with him in an artistic capacity.
And I think that because I've designed, I think right now he has 2 books out between, I think he has Crystal Lake and Transmissions from Marteau, but
Mm-hmm.
I've worked on kind of both of the full lengths he'll have out, and then on Rectum, and then there's another project we've been talking about in kind of like the semi-distant future. And so we've built up enough rapport that he can say some in just wild, vague thing to me, and I'm like, I think I get what you're saying, and then I can go and try and put it together. And I think that's the kind of fun bit of design, is when you build that rapport and you can try something wild or stupid without, someone yelling at you. And that's all the Cloak kind of experiences so far have been really fun in that way, that everyone's giving me a lot of freedom to just kind of go for it. With both of these, although Police Lucifer is mainly William's design that I kind of tweaked and updated for kind of, his original was in 5x8 and this one's 4 1/4 by 7. So a lot of the design work I did was kind of more on that resize, and in InDesign you kind of get to see that 2-page spread versus in Word, and so kind of working with that new kind of perspective.
You did give it that kind of mic polish. It's obviously like, I mean, it's funny when you start to get into a lot of these texts, you start to see things, you're like, but Mike did that, and then you find out, yes, he did, and that's cool too. And even in like the font choices and stuff, I'm getting into like little specifics, but again, wildly different styles and types of things, but when Mike put his little spin on the design, it became even more so a Cloak title. And I think that's important. And like, we talked about what's the common thread. I think obviously Mike is a big part of that with his sort of nod in the direction of design. And he can say that I given him stuff. I did, but Mike definitely put that little zip to it,
I hope you'll take this as the compliment I mean it to be, but I think of Mike as like a Rick Rubin of book design. Like, it just put some magic in there.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And like I said, everyone's been very accommodating and kind of let me do what I want to do, and so it was great. Also, when I asked Danika if I could use all these ugly fonts, and she was like, "Yeah, that's great. I love it," and like gave me the freedom to make something purposefully kind of ugly and malicious in the design. And so everyone's been really kind of great in that capacity. Everybody that I've worked with Cloak, who's already out and coming out in the future, has been great, which I've been really lucky in that regard. And there's kind of unrelated to this, but it's also allowed a certain kind of amount of spontaneity with the releases that I really enjoy, because I feel like a lot of presses, and I'm sure I might kind of fall victim to this in the future as things grow, but a lot of presses work like years and years and years in advance.
Yeah.
And I feel like being small and also the designer allows me to kind of work at whatever pace and kind of drop things out of nowhere in a really fun way. And that's been kind of the method thus far, is that I haven't really built up to any releases ahead of time. And I've just been like, this is out now. It's in the world. You can, like, if it's digital, you can go to this link and engage with it, or if it's a print, like, you can get it here. And I've really enjoyed that kind of immediate and spontaneous approach. It feels a lot more fun than being on this like really long-term calendar of being like, okay guys, next year keep an eye out for this title. I can be like, it's here, it's available, check it out now.
Yeah, I like that. I also appreciate Danika's statement that you're sort of like a producer, like a music producer, somebody who...
Yeah, it feels that way. I think that's a really accurate way to put it, because it feels like it's not necessarily like my work, but I'm working on it and trying to get it to kind of the most honest or kind of it place that I can get it.
Right. Especially because with work like this,
yeah.
Especially because with work like this, it's editing is the the definition of editing becomes different from standard literature. So like, what does it mean to edit something that's, you know, the words are everywhere? And I appreciate that for Cloak, because I want more of that within the indie press world, right? Like, I like the idea that John adjusts the kerning of every single letter on every single book that he touches.
Oh God. I haven't gotten that far, because that's
please don't, because that's bad for you. But you know,
it's about mental health at the end of the day, right?
Right.
I think John's psyche can handle that better than I can at the moment. But yeah, there's still some ideas that I want to play with. I want to get a project at some point that I can do as like a Lisa Frank style design. If you remember her, with like the really bright like pink and yellow,
the
like
dolphins,
sparkly green. Yeah, the dolphin. Like, I would love to do that kind of like ugliness at some point. So there's a couple kind of design ideas that I'm waiting for the right project for Cloak. But it's been very fun to kind of like figure out the very individual approach for each. Because I like the idea that I have some stamp on it, but I want to make sure that, you know, they don't all look the same. Letting them have that kind of distinct feel, kind of working around what the project demands, rather than me being like, I really like this font, so everything's got to work around that. I really want to kind of accentuate that individuality within each.
And then finally, as we approach an hour, the other thing I really appreciate about Cloak is that you've launched with a Patreon, and Cloak it says on the website, Cloak is funded exclusively through our Patreon, with 100% of royalties being paid to authors and artists. That might be self-explanatory, but explain like how that works and why you made that choice.
Yeah,
because I think it's fantastic.
Thank you. I kind of did it with for a couple reasons. I very much am into transparency. I like which is funny considering the themes of the press, but I don't really want to like hide anything on the financial or the business end. Like, I want it to be all kind of readily available in that regard. But for that, kind of part of the reason I did it is that I think kind of like the standard for a lot of the small presses that I really like is that they'll do like a 50-50 or 40-60 split with the author for the profit of the book. And that usually puts the book around like $15. And so what I've done is I've just kind of done that, but removed the kind of 50% that I would get from it. And that allows me to bring the book down to like $8 to $12, depending on the length and the materials. And so I like that kind of method because it allows me to make the book a lot more affordable. Because it's a lot easier to convince yourself to buy like a $10 book than a $15 or a $20 or $25 book.
Right.
And then also it still kind of supports the author as much as the other method would. And then the Patreon creates like kind of a secondary clear channel for people to support the press directly. And so I like the idea that it's like, if you just want to support the author, you buy the book and it all goes to them. But if you also want to support the press, then the Patreon acts as this kind of like clear method for doing that. And so I really like that kind of, it feels like the most like ethical approach that I can make to kind of everyone knowing where their money is going and everyone getting paid appropriately for their work. And that extends to like donations made to digital projects. All of that goes to authors as well, in the same way that profits for print releases would. And so that payment method, although it's less financially kind of not viable, but financially lucrative for me, felt kind of like the ideal approach in my eyes.
Yeah, I think it's more correct than most presses do.
Thank you.
I also just find I remember I tweeted back in like 2016 or something, like back when I was submitting small pieces to presses, thinking that would help me get books published. That like why this is mostly goes to literary magazines, but like you tell me on your website that you can't pay me for my piece, but you hope to someday, but there's no Patreon, no Ko-fi, no PayPal link. Like,
no plan.
How are you hoping to do it? Like, are we just manifesting? Because if that's the case.
Yeah. And that's what I like about the Patreon is it's a kind of much more long-term plan for making the press sustainable or profitable or kind of whatever positive term there. But I like that transparency a lot of just saying like, these are the avenues and this is the approach. And I mean, I'm using print on demand. And so, I don't have to accommodate for a print run where a press will put in like several $100 or $1,000 to do a print run, and then they have to be concerned about making that money back. And so with print on demand, I don't have to worry about having made some, large financial investment. The money can just go directly to the author, and it ends up working out really cleanly,
right?
Thus far, at least.
And then it allows you to put out work that you're passionate about putting out rather than having to worry about whether or not it's going to sell well. And
exactly.
Then, yeah.
The main concern is just the art,
Mm-hmm.
That's as cheesy as that might sound. The work itself is really the only bit that I care about.
Right. So I'd like to get some final thoughts from everybody, let's start with William. What, based on what we've talked about, or maybe something we haven't talked about, what's something you want to leave everybody with who's listening to this as they move forward into the world?
I think, as I've sort of started going in this direction with more obscure literature, it has started to, it's really filled a void. I grew up reading, a lot of regular books, a lot of, I had my favorite novels and everything, but there is so much more out there, and there's so much more, books can affect you in a completely different way when they move beyond just words. And, I love that about this kind of work, and Cloak's obviously doing like wonderful things with that, not just in a literary form, but in working in digital means and everything. And before I ever talked to Mike about putting out something, I immediately got involved with the Patreon because I was like, this is the direction that I think is great, and I like that surprise factor because I don't know what's going to come up next. I don't know what's going to be the next thing. And I love that. I've sort of have this subscription to this thing that's curated by Mike, and it has, a good mind behind it, a direction that is something that I completely support. I completely am fascinated with. And, I hope more people can find this because it's so good. And the themes, for me, are so potent, and they're so important right now. And you get them in this sort of quality that's, we're all sort of informed by different forms of media and different forms of entertainment. And I don't know, I'm just really super happy to be a part of it. And I love it. And I want people to absorb it because it's fucking amazing. It's a great way to get into, into your head and into the heads of other people.
Danika?
Yeah. I'd say something similar. Like, this week was a terrible week for a lot of people, I think. And I jumped on like a Zoom reading on Thursday at night. I didn't really feel like it, but I did. But it was a poetry reading for Ben Nizpajani's book release for Pickpocket the Big Top, which is a chapbook that's like he wrote while watching movies, like old movies about the circus. And I'm super pumped to get it. Like I ordered it. But just like watching these people read, like these poets, and some of them were writing short stories too, just like read and interact and like encourage each other, and share their work. It was just like the only good thing that happened to me this week. It was like this bright spot, and there's this like sense of community that I really appreciate, especially within like the small press world. And we're all creating like these objects with our minds, and it's like this sort of like ultimate act of sharing and community and like love, and it's like the best thing that we do amid like all of the darkness and the awful that happens. And I'm just like honored to be a part of like what Mike's building, and the kind of space that he's creating with Cloak. So I just hope that people will be a part of that, and enjoy it. And I'm just like looking forward to what comes out in the future as well. And it is totally fun. Like I am on the Patreon too. It's so fun to like get each new like print release in the mail. It's just like it's such a nice surprise. So thanks to Mike, and I'm looking forward to more things in the future.
And Mike, you finally, last words on the podcast today.
This has been great. I feel like I've just been getting complimented for an hour. But yeah, I mean, I'm really proud and thankful for what's going on with Cloak. Like I said, all the authors have been incredible to work with. I definitely recommend checking out Danika's work, Relentless, and just in general, her book Pilot is fantastic. She read from it back in, I think Danika said October is when that book festival and event were.
Yeah.
And her work's fantastic. And William's work is fantastic as well, with Hell and Paradise, and he has a bunch of really cool kind of digital zines that he's been putting out recently. And Police Lucifer is a bop. And so I definitely recommend checking out both of their work, and going through the Cloak kind of catalog. It's all really great authors, both within what we've released through Cloak itself and what they've done on their own. And there's a lot more fun stuff to come. And I would love an author to send me a submission that I can turn into a Lisa Frank nightmare. So I think I'll end on that demand / request. But this has been a lot of fun.